You don't feel numb because life lost its meaning. You feel numb because algorithms stole it. Big tech didn't just change the way you scroll. It rewired the way you live, think, and even dream. What once came from rituals, myths, and cultural traditions has been replaced by dopamine-driven feeds, engineered to keep you stuck in media overload. Instead of guiding you toward depth, the attention economy conditions you into repression and shadow denial, until identity erosion feels normal. And here's the catch. The more you perform a digital persona, the further you drift from your own soul. Carl Jung warned that without symbolic life, the psyche begins to starve. That's exactly what's happening now. Dehumanization dressed up as entertainment, culture lost sold as progress, and collective unconscious polluted by repetition instead of meaning. You're not broken, you're just living under mass conditioning designed to fragment your ego. But individuation offers a way out. By unplugging from digital culture and reclaiming rituals, archetypes, and genuine human connection, you recover the cultural soul algorithms erased. How big tech replaced culture with algorithms? Culture used to be the living rhythm of communities. Rituals, stories, songs, and traditions passed down to keep meaning alive. But when big tech entered the scene, algorithms quietly pushed those rituals aside. Instead of gathering around a fire to tell stories, people now gather around screens to chase trends that vanish in a week. Culture loss crept in disguise as novelty, leaving the collective unconscious craving something deeper, but finding only quick dopamine hits. What once held depth and connection became fragmented into digital culture, optimized for clicks, not for soul. Think about it. Ancient myths took centuries to shape human identity, while a TikTok sound lasts maybe a month before fading. Media overload ensures that depth gets traded for speed, and the attention economy rewards surface-level engagement. Archetypes that once emerged through ritual are now buried under layers of memes and viral clips, stripped of their roots. It's not that stories are gone. It's that they've been repackaged into snack-sized shadows of themselves. This creates ego fragmentation, where identity is constantly reshaped by what the feed decides to show next. And here's the kicker. Algorithms don't just recommend content. They sculpt the persona you end up performing. The more you scroll, the more your soul suppression deepens, as authentic expression is replaced by conditioned response. Mass conditioning thrives in this loop, convincing people they're choosing freely, when in truth, their desires have been carefully engineered. It's like symbolic death in slow motion, culture dissolving into clickable moments that leave you feeling strangely empty. Dehumanization doesn't arrive as a dictator shouting orders. It arrives as endless notifications asking for your attention. Now imagine how much meaning has been lost because of this shift. Traditions that once taught values are replaced by challenges, filters, and trends that reinforce identity erosion. People used to gather in plazas, temples, or family homes to pass down wisdom. Today, they gather in digital spaces where wisdom is drowned out by noise. The persona of the digital self thrives, while the deeper shadow remains ignored. Repression of genuine feeling happens as naturally as scrolling. One swipe and you're on to the next distraction, without even realizing what you've buried. Yet, beneath all of this, the psyche knows it's starving. Deep down, there's a longing for something more than just media overload and dopamine addiction. People feel it when they can't sleep, when numbness creeps in, when they sense their individuality slipping into the machine. Culture wasn't erased overnight. It was replaced, piece by piece, by algorithms that promise stimulation but never fulfillment. And this slow erosion opens the door for another wound to take hold, one Carl Jung himself warned about: the death of symbolic life. Carl Jung and the death of the symbolic life. Carl Jung understood something most people overlook today. Culture isn't just decoration. It's a vessel carrying archetypes and mythic meaning. Without those symbolic anchors, the psyche drifts like a ship without a compass. Big tech, in its pursuit of attention economy dominance, has stripped culture of these deep roots, replacing myth with media overload and ritual with algorithmic novelty. What remains is digital culture, fast, flashy, and hollow, where soul suppression becomes the norm. In this landscape, culture loss is not only external but internal, eroding the collective unconscious. Consider how symbols once shaped human identity. The cross, the mandala, the hero's journey. They weren't mere designs but portals into the shadow and the soul. Now, those same archetypes get flattened into logos, memes, and marketing campaigns, stripped of depth and recycled until they lose their transformative power. Carl Jung warned that when symbols lose their vitality, the psyche begins to wither. In today's world, that withering manifests as numbness, identity erosion, and ego fragmentation, where people feel like they're performing life rather than living it. Digital culture, in its current form, offers images without soul. Scroll through your feed. You'll see symbols everywhere, but they're emptied of meaning. A heart emoji replaces the complexity of love. A trending hashtag substitutes for authentic collective action. The shadow of culture is there, but it's hollow, producing symbolic death rather than renewal. And with each recycled image, the collective unconscious becomes polluted with meaningless repetition. This is mass conditioning at its peak, not through censorship, but through overexposure to content stripped of essence. To see this in practice, think about rituals like coming-of-age ceremonies. In tribal communities, they were gateways into individuation, teaching responsibility, courage, and identity. Today, the closest equivalent might be getting your first smartphone, a rite of passage in a dopamine addiction and media overload. Instead of a journey into the self, it becomes a journey into consumerism. This inversion of ritual feeds repression and dehumanization, because it gives the appearance of progress while concealing the erosion of authentic cultural inheritance. And the danger is subtle. When the psyche no longer finds nourishment in symbolic life, it compensates with distraction. Jung would argue that what you repress doesn't disappear. It festers in the shadow, waiting for expression. That's why so many feel restless, anxious, or perpetually dissatisfied, because they're living inside a symbolic desert. And yet, the desert isn't silent. It whispers reminders of what's been lost, preparing the stage for the next chapter in this story: the rise of numbness and emotional flatlining. The rise of numbness and emotional flatlining. The human nervous system wasn't designed for nonstop digital culture. Constant scrolling, notifications, and viral content hijack dopamine pathways, creating a cycle of stimulation without satisfaction. Over time, this dopamine addiction dulls emotional sensitivity, leaving people unable to fully feel joy, grief, or even love. It's not serenity, it's numbness disguised as peace. Big tech exploits this numbness, because the flatter your emotions, the easier it is to predict your behavior and keep you glued to the screen. In this way, the attention economy thrives on soul suppression. Look around and you'll see how normalized this emotional flatlining has become. Friends sit together in silence, each trapped in their digital persona, endlessly checking feeds instead of checking in with one another. The collective unconscious, once filled with archetypes and symbolic depth, is now cluttered with half-laughs from recycled memes. Culture loss expresses itself not only in traditions forgotten, but also in feelings repressed. Carl Jung might say we've mistaken repression for resilience, when in truth, it's a shadow forming beneath our collective skin. The scary part: people start to confuse numbness with progress. They'll say things like, "I'm unbothered," or "nothing gets to me anymore," as if emotional detachment equals strength. But in reality, this emotional erosion signals identity fragmentation, a symbolic death of inner vitality. Media overload convinces us that constant distraction is a cure, when it's actually the disease. Dehumanization doesn't happen with violence. It happens when people forget what it feels like to be deeply human. And that forgetting happens swipe by swipe, scroll by scroll. There are ways to recognize and resist this creeping flatline. Try spending a week journaling your emotions without distraction. Notice how uncomfortable silence feels at first, then how alive it becomes. Read Jung's reflections on individuation or myths that reconnect you to archetypes like the hero or the sage. Replace media overload with symbolic nourishment. Pick up a novel, meditate in nature, or even watch a film that challenges instead of numbs. These small actions begin to restore presence and undo the cycle of repression. Yet most will avoid these practices, preferring the easy anesthesia of screens. But the soul doesn't forget. It cries out through anxiety, burnout, or that quiet sense that something is missing. This numbness isn't the end. It's the symptom of a deeper fracture between the digital persona and the living psyche. And if the fracture keeps widening, it forces the next stage into view: the rise of a false persona built entirely for performance, not for truth. The false persona of the digital self. Carl Jung warned that the persona, the mask we were to interact with society, can become dangerous if we confuse it with who we truly are. In the age of big tech, this danger multiplies. Online, people craft digital personas optimized for likes, shares, and algorithms rather than authenticity. It's no longer about expressing the soul, but about feeding the attention economy. The result? Ego fragmentation, where the inner self becomes split between what is lived and what is performed. Identity erosion begins quietly but spreads like wildfire in digital culture. Think of Instagram influencers who post perfect morning routines that look spiritual but are staged for engagement. The ritual is hollow, designed for media overload, not inner growth. This is soul suppression masquerading as self-expression. And the tragic part? Mass conditioning convinces people that this curated performance is reality. The digital persona becomes a shadow of the real self, projecting an image of control while repressing vulnerability, sadness, or complexity. Repression here isn't random. It's rewarded by big tech through clicks, comments, and temporary validation. What's dangerous is that the psyche adapts to this reward system. Over time, the false persona becomes internalized, and people begin to forget who they were before algorithms shaped their desires. Carl Jung would argue that over-identification with persona leads to inner disintegration, a symbolic death of authenticity. It's why so many feel exhausted after posting, anxious about engagement, and yet unable to stop. Dopamine addiction doesn't just come from consuming content. It also comes from performing a version of yourself that isn't real. Let's get practical. How can one spot the difference between true self-expression and persona performance? Ask yourself, would you still share this if no one could see it? Would you still write, paint, sing, or dance if algorithms couldn't measure it? If the answer is yes, you're closer to individuation. If the answer is no, chances are you're stuck in ego fragmentation, rehearsing a script that big tech handed you. Individuation requires peeling back that mask and confronting the repression it hides. And yet, the irony is that people already sense the dissonance. They feel the hollowness after hours online, the strange ache of dehumanization that comes with performing life instead of living it. That ache is a signal from the shadow, a reminder that the digital persona can never replace the archetypal depth of the real self. Which brings us to the turning point. If there's a way out of this trap, it lies in individuation, the recovery of cultural soul, and the remembering of what you were before the algorithms. Individuation and the recovery of cultural soul. Individuation, as Carl Jung described, is not about becoming who society wants you to be, but about integrating shadow, persona, and true self into wholeness. In today's world, that journey means confronting the invisible strings big tech has wrapped around your desires. Mass conditioning has taught people to chase dopamine addiction, confuse persona with authenticity, and accept culture loss as normal. But individuation breaks that spell. It asks you to pause, unplug from media overload, and reclaim rituals, myths, and symbols that nourish the soul instead of fragmenting it. Culture isn't just entertainment. It's a living mirror of the collective unconscious. When you reconnect with it intentionally, individuation becomes possible. Reading myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh or revisiting spiritual texts that explore archetypes can reawaken the symbolic life. These aren't dusty relics. They're antidotes to identity erosion. Rituals like journaling at dawn, meditating in silence, or gathering with community to share stories revive what digital culture suppresses. Through these acts, repression loosens its grip and symbolic death gives way to rebirth. The soul thrives not on speed, but on depth. Digital culture teaches us to scroll endlessly, but individuation teaches us to stop, feel, and integrate. Try setting aside one evening a week with no screens, where you write, reflect, or simply breathe. This may sound small, but it's revolutionary against the dehumanization engineered by big tech. Attention is power. Reclaiming it transforms you from passive consumer to active creator. This shift doesn't just heal the individual, it begins to heal the culture itself. Of course, the process isn't easy. Individuation requires facing the shadow you've avoided through distraction. It means admitting that numbness wasn't peace, that your digital persona was a mask, and that your soul has been quietly asking for more. But this confrontation is the gateway to freedom. The archetypes waiting in the collective unconscious, the sage, the hero, the healer, aren't gone. They're buried under media overload. Unearthing them is how culture is restored, not as nostalgia, but as living meaning. And here's the truth. Healing begins the moment you remember what you were before the algorithms shaped you. That memory isn't about the past. It's about rediscovering the timeless within you. Individuation is not retreating from the world, but stepping into it with soul intact, no longer fragmented by ego or repression. And when enough individuals reclaim their cultural soul, the collective unconscious begins to shift as well. Which leads us to the heart of the matter: how big tech erased culture and trained us in a numbness, and how Jung's vision can guide us back. So let me ask you straight. How long will you let algorithms dictate the rhythm of your soul? Every swipe that fuels dopamine addiction, every moment of media overload that numbs your spirit, is another piece of symbolic death creeping in. Carl Jung knew that repression only buries what demands to be faced. If you felt that quiet ache, that emptiness big tech can't fill, that's your shadow calling you back to yourself. The question is, will you answer? Imagine what happens when you step off the treadmill of culture loss and reclaim your own rituals. What would your life look like if individuation, not mass conditioning, guided your choices? You'd no longer live as a fragmented persona, but as a whole being deeply rooted in archetypes, alive to meaning. This isn't philosophy for the bookshelf, it's survival for the soul. Start simple, unplug, write, breathe, read something timeless. Rebuild your connection with the collective unconscious before numbness becomes the new normal. And here's where it gets real. If you're tired of dehumanization and ready to recover your cultural soul, then it's time to act. Don't just consume this knowledge, live it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where have you felt the erosion of identity most in your own life? Hit subscribe and ring the bell, because the journey doesn't stop here. This is only the beginning of reclaiming depth in a shallow age. And together, we'll go far beyond the shadow big tech cast over us.